Your supply chain can make or break your business. With Global Trans, you have the advantage of innovative logistics technology, expansive solutions and carrier network, and a partner committed to your success. Global Trans, freight driven by technology.
Welcome to Off the Supply Chain, a show for shippers. If the supply chain is all about cooperative competition, so is our show. We're bringing you compelling perspectives from 3 industry experts. On this week's episode, we'll be debating infrastructure. We're talking about the physical systems of a business or nation. Things like roads, bridges, communication, sewage, and electrical systems. These are high-cost investments, but vital to a country's economic development. Everyone agrees the U.S.'s infrastructure is crumbling and past due for improvements. But the problem remains, who's responsible for funding it and how? This is just one of the questions we'll be debating on this week's episode of Off the Supply Chain. Now to our host, Chad Prevost.
Joining us today on the great infrastructure debate, John Kingston has an almost 40-year career covering commodities. He created the dated Brent benchmark, now the world's most important crude oil marker. At S&P Global, he had a role in the efforts to promote better infrastructure in the US. Chris Henry is FreightWaves VP of Carrier Profitability and has his finger on the pulse of truckload, a segment of the transportation industry that is most affected by the deteriorating road infrastructure of the US. Chief Insights Officer Dean Croak has a strong trucking background in trucking operations. Dean has racked up literally millions of miles between his Australian and US over-the-road truck driving days and can attest something has got to change with our country's infrastructure. Each guest gets 40 seconds to respond with a 30-second follow-up. And of course, this is the supply chain show of competitive banter, so we keep score. When you hear this sound, you have 10 seconds. When you hear this sound, you are out of time. This sound means you get a point, and this sound means you lose a point. Let's get started. This summer, both sides of the aisle scrambled to bring attention to the US's infrastructure issue, hoping to get something passed before the end of the legislative calendar. But the deadline came and went. Bob Costello, chief economist and SVP of the American Trucking Association, noted that raising taxes is never popular on Capitol Hill. But there is a strong case to be made at the state level, saying, quote, Arkansas just passed, with a Republican legislature and Republican governor, a fuels tax increase. We do not know of any Republican that has been kicked out of office at the state level because they voted for a fuels tax increase. In light of remaining at a deadlock on the federal level for what appears to be the better part of 2.5 decades, would a fuel tax increase at the state level be a solution for now?
Yes, I think it is, and I think you're right. And you mentioned Arkansas, but a lot of other states have crafted together various plans for better infrastructure. They usually involve higher fuel taxes. It's not always easy. Defining fuel taxes is kind of tough because are they tolls? I mean, a toll isn't a fuel tax, but do you try to hit just truckers? Do you try to hit gasoline as well? So it is complicated, but you're right that this is not really a death knell in a Republican primary, for example. So there really is a good record of a lot of states passing fuel taxes, deciding they're not going to wait on Washington. We're going to get it done ourselves. And a package of a broad-based fuel tax is significant enough to usually to pay for the improvements.
Okay, Chris Henry, what do you think?
Well, I don't think at the state level it is enough. We need larger scale investment from the federal level. And right now, federal lawmakers do not have any interest in implementing a fuel tax on both sides of the political spectrum. They consider it suicide, political suicide. So what the benefit of the states implementing these fuel taxes is they're showing their federal counterparts the way and basically allowing them to demonstrate that it's not going to hurt them in election.
Interesting. What do you think, Dean?
It makes no sense that the states aren't leading the way. If you think about the last 10 years, 30 states have increased gas taxes. In the last 3 years, 13 states. Of those 13 states, 9 are Republican states. And the vast majority of the GOP Republicans in those states voted for the gas tax. None of them weren't re-elected. So I think the big issue is that there isn't a penalty to be paid by raising gas taxes. I think the reality for all of us road users is that we'd rather pay for it at the pump than underneath fixing broken equipment.
Okay, so there's a stalemate at the national federal level. It's not enough for just states to be doing it. If the fuel tax isn't the solution and we're at a stalemate, what is the best approach, Dean? What do you think?
Having some experience with the road user tax in Australia, I would propose that we take the focus off the people that are driving the vehicles. So for example, most of the damage that trucks cause to the roads is caused by the freight they carry. If you look at trains, boats, planes, a lot of the excess emissions and the damage to the road pavements are caused by the freight. I would propose that you spread the cost across the entire supply chain. OEMs that make trucks, a bill of lading tax, if you like.
Wow, okay, spread it all across. What do you think? What would your solution be, Chris?
Well, the fuel tax is a solution. It's the most effective funding mechanism for any kind of infrastructure build. Okay. There's a method in place right now that allows the trucking companies to pay for, to pass along that additional cost to the shipper, who in turn passes along to the consumer. There's such wide fluctuations in the price of fuel. It's not a difficult thing to implement.
Okay, well, John, what do you think? Like, I mean, obviously, trucking, over-the-road trucking is going to be using the infrastructure a lot, but with the ATA, they would probably say, hey, you're targeting us with a fuels tax increase. What would your solution be?
Well, a fuel tax is the simplest, but the second simplest really is to use more tolls on major interstates through a state. And that's what they tried to do in Virginia on 81. That didn't work. They're looking at it in Connecticut. It's fairly simple because truckers pay it. Cars pay it. In Virginia on 81, they had a thing, so if you were a local resident, you had to drive, say 2-3 exits every day for work, you could get a special pass that you wouldn't have to get hit hard. So I think tolls are great in their simplicity.
And at the end of round one, we have John Kingston with 6, Chris Henry with 4, and Dean Croak with 5. S&P Global just published a case for connecting U.S. labor productivity and the possibility of an impending recession to investing in publicly funded infrastructure. They argue that delayed maintenance and updates have effectively, quote, clipped the economy's wings. It's no secret that U.S. infrastructure is in dire need of investment. While private investment is great when it happens, it is also unpredictable and subject to investors' demands. The report argues that a more predictable public investment could be used to spur productivity growth. In the past, we haven't focused on public infrastructure programs until we need them to create jobs. Does better infrastructure correlate directly to improved economic conditions? Chris, what do you think?
I think that's a bit of a stretch. The article itself points to a gain of about 0.1 to 0.2% percentage points in GDP. So I kind of use the analogy of using tax savings as a primary objective. For the 1%, that may make sense, but for the vast majority of us, that's not what. So infrastructure isn't the way to improve GDP. However, it's much needed on the long-term basis to reduce congestion and improve.
Okay, well, what do you think, Dean?
I think there's a direct correlation, because if you just take the simple data sets we've got, like hours of service, where drivers only run about 6.8 hours out of every 11, essentially they're only using 62% of their available driving hours every day. And considering they spend so much time in traffic, if you look at the ATRI data, drivers spend the equivalent, in terms of opportunity cost, they spend the equivalent of 6 weeks a year sitting in traffic that could be used to run more miles, generate more pay for drivers, reduce driver turnover, but for shippers, actually reduce the cost of transportation.
Wow, also for shippers. John, what do you think?
Well, full disclosure, I worked for S&P Global when they did a lot of work on infrastructure. So,
that's right.
So they're still hammering away. And one of the key thrusts that they've always said at S&P Global about paying for this are public-private partnerships. And that usually comes down to tolls, because there's got to be some way to pay the private entity for the work that they've done. The beauty of public-private partnerships is, like, the one drawback is you don't get to borrow at government rates. but the long-term benefit is better because the public-private partnership assumes that the third party is going to continue to invest in it. The road's not going to fall apart because government didn't put enough in. The third party is supposed to continue investing in it until the end of the deal. So that's really what they're pushing.
Well, it sounds like you would kind of think that there is a multiplier effect too, such as the article said, where like once there is just an initiative that begins, other people might hop in and work toward the same goal.
Well, I mean, there's two ways of looking at it. There is certainly a short-term boost to the economy by putting people to work. Classic going back to the Great Depression and Works Progress Administration, the WPA projects. On the other hand, certainly I agree with Dean, where if you've got better infrastructure and you've got more efficient transportation, more efficient transit, there's an economic benefit to that.
Okay, Chris, I mean, do you think, do we have to be in a recession for such initiatives to happen, do you think, or can we do it even during a positive economy? Well,
the employment market is so tight right now, it would have an inflationary effect. So waiting until there's a recession is likely going to be the actual outcome. This is a long-term program and perspective that you have to take into account. So doing it during a different employment environment would be much more effective.
What do you think, Dean? Is there any hope to take action now, and how should it be done?
I think following the traditional trend of waiting until things are in disaster mode to change, I think that, there's a saying, if you're doing the same thing as everybody else, you're probably doing the wrong thing. What I'd be doing right now is I'd be pouring it on right now and taking a long view to this so that the infrastructure was in place when we needed it. It'll make us more competitive as a country. It'll just make our economy run much smoother. It'll increase efficiency. So I'd be doing it right now. It has also lots of political points to be gained from by turning infrastructure bill around into something that we can look forward to next year.
Okay, and at the end of round 2, the score is John Kingston 10, Chris Henry 8, and Dean Croak 10. We have a tie. Bringing it back to the federal level, congressional leaders and President Trump agree the U.S. must spend at least $2 trillion to fix the nation's aging infrastructure. That comes to about 0.8% of U.S. GDP. If we can get beyond the question of how we're going to pay for the improvements, the first question is, what is the most urgent priority? Let's start with Dean.
Bridges. Bridges by far, because bridges do the most damage, and it's got a lot to do with the fact that bridges are concrete, and when you hit a bridge abutment, as you come off the soft blacktop, there's always a massive shudder to the truck. It damages freight, it damages equipment. Truck axles are springs, the rest of the axles are airbags, so most of the impact to trucks and the freight is on the front part of it. Most of our bridges are reaching the end of their useful life. Their average age is 43 years. About 4 in 10 bridges are what they call in bad shape. They need annual repairs, and think the data says about 9% of our bridges are structurally deficient, which means they need constant repair and yearly monitoring.
Oh, wow, that many. I think 50% are in need of complete overhaul. John, what do you think?
Well, I can't disagree with that. I would have said the same thing. So I'll say something different, just to say something different. And I'm going to reflect it as a New Yorker. It's interesting for me to look at the discussion about the main train lines that go from New Jersey into New York and paying for that. There was supposed to be a federal agreement to pay it, and it hasn't worked out. President Trump put a stop to it. But I've always wondered, most Americans probably think that's a very much of a local, regional level. But if you've got this incredibly important economy that has such an outsized impact on the rest of the country, if it lost a main train line, what's the impact on the country's economy? I think it's significant, and that's why some of these battles over infrastructure become a local versus national thing. It's tough to solve.
All right, John Kingston with his New York bias. Chris Henry, what do you think?
I think the primary thing is congestion. So prioritizing the modes of transport and the reason for that transport. So commercial, commuter traffic, and then kind of personal conveyance. So providing incentives for that personal conveyance group to get off the roads, kind of the trends in terms of the millennials and things like that's doing it for themselves already, but making sure that the commercial transportation, getting the goods to the people that have purchased it are the priority focus.
Well, one study actually estimates that the average American spends around $1,000 annually just as a result of not improving aging infrastructure. Would you be willing to just spend more than that to get some things done?
Well, I think so. Sometimes you have to lead the way, and leading the way typically is a contrarian approach. in most situations. So doing that on their behalf is going to pay benefits for them long term.
John, it's expensive in New York. Would you be
expensive
willing to
everywhere,
spend?
But I think it's notable that when you go past a lot of road projects, there'll be a big sign that says your tax dollars at work, your tax dollars working for you. And I think this is a type of government spending that people can get behind. They see the benefits of it. There's a road stretch they used to go over that would shatter their teeth, and now it's nice and smooth. They used to be worried, let's say, about a bridge going to fall down, as Dean refers to, and now they don't have to worry about it. This is spending that I think would have a lot of bipartisan support, and you can see the impact of it right up front.
What do you think, Dean?
Infrastructure spending is something you can see, touch, feel. Truckers generally, have two seasons. As we're all talking about fall and pumpkin spice lattes, truckers are so happy that the construction season's over. Because for truckers on the road, there's two seasons, construction and winter. And the reality is that during the construction season, they spend so much time sitting in traffic and it costs them so much money, their hours of service goes down and shipper costs go up as a result of it. So I think infrastructure spending is critical to greasing the skids, as it were, to get things moving quickly.
Wow, I love your trucker perspective consistently from round to round. After 3 rounds leading into our lightning round, Dean's starting to separate himself a little bit. We've got John Kingston with 12, Chris Henry with 11, and Dean with 18. Okay, big deal or little deal? What's the deal with you? Early in his presidency, President Trump said, "We will build gleaming new roads, bridges, highways, and railways, and waterways all across our land, and we will do it with American heart and American hands and American grit." Would trying to realize this vision now be a big deal or a little deal? Why or why not,
Big
John?
deal, but it's not going to happen in a Washington grip with impeachment and hyper-partisanship. This is not going to happen, period.
Okay, Chris.
Big deal. Everyone wants something like that to get behind, but the reality is nothing's going to happen until after the election, if any.
Sad but true, maybe. Dean, what do you think?
A big deal. One of the best ways to get people looking forward and positive is to invest in infrastructure. Right now, China invests 8.3% of GDP. Our average is 2.2. Right here in Freight Alley, it's even less than the national average. We carry most of the freight. It's a big deal.
Okay, so it's a big deal, but there's no hope. Recently, more than 2 million Pacific Gas and Electric Company customers in the San Francisco area were outraged when PG&E shut off their power. The utility says it was a public safety measure meant to reduce the chance of transmission lines sparking deadly wildfires during extreme dryness and heat. This highlights an issue of American infrastructure that is unable to support both urbanization and climate change. Is this a big deal or a little deal? Why or why not, Chris Henry?
I think it's a big deal. 10 years ago, you didn't see that happening. I think it is regional. California wildfires the last few years have been an issue, and the last one was sparked by one of PG&E's lines. So they're trying to limit liability, and I think it's a big deal.
Limit liability, other reasons for it, Dean, what do you think?
Big deal. It's somewhat ironic that in a state that encourages people to use electric cars, that we can't support the charging of said vehicles. So I think has to be a lot more investment in infrastructure, notwithstanding the fact that a lot of people on medical devices that needed power were affected by this. It's a big deal.
Okay, John?
It's an enormous deal. The impact on the California economy is going to be huge. You're talking about taking a good part of the state and kind of sending it back 100 years. And it may be that a public utility is going to have to take over PG&E. I don't know where this goes. This is huge.
Finally, this is it. The very last question. How are we going to separate ourselves from the pack? The Federal Railroad Administration is awarding more than $326 million in grants to help states and localities repair, maintain, and build rail infrastructure, supporting freight rail and intercity passenger rail. Big deal or little deal? Why or why not, Dean?
Big deal. Just look at the railroads. It takes 48 hours for a train to go from Los Angeles to Chicago, and then another whole day just to go across Chicago. 6 of the 7 Class 1 railroads intersect in Chicago. It's a really big deal in one of the largest freight markets in the country.
Okay, John?
I'll go with Dean and say big deal, though I really wonder if Is all that federal money going to be better than just the private railroads, the Class 1 railroads, their own capital expenditures? I mean, they spend quite a bit of money. I don't know how much of an addition on top of it it's going to be.
Okay, Chris, final word?
I think it's a big deal. You want to get the congestion out of the existing road network. So getting some of that commuter traffic and personal travel out of the road network is good for the economy, and it's a big deal.
And at the end of our debate, it is John Kingston with 17, Chris Henry with 16, and Dean Croak with a commanding 23 points, tying our all-time high on Off the Supply Chain. So thanks to everyone for playing. Dean, congratulations.
Thank you.
You have made the Dean's List. What are you going to do as the champion for the week of Off the Supply Chain?
I'm not sure. I might share the love around the office and get some other people to wear this.
Okay, that's what we like to hear. So thanks for everybody for tuning in to another outstanding episode, if I may say so myself, of Off the Supply Chain. Thanks to Emily Zink and everybody else who has been a part of putting this show on. We'll see you next week.
Join us next week as FreightWaves multimedia specialist Tim Dooner, Covenant Transport Services innovation strategist Matt McCulland, and founding partner with Dynamo Ventures, Santosh Sankar, have a lively discussion about the warehouse boom. See you next Friday.
Global Trans offers a full suite of solutions around logistics, supply chain, and transportation.
Technology is what we do. Global Trans is bringing the trucking industry into the 21st century. From a small family-run business to now almost $1 billion company. We did that all together as a team, and we're bringing the people, processes, and software together.
When I joined the company 3 years ago, I was attracted to the high growth and fast-paced environment, but I'm proud to say that we still have that nimble entrepreneurial spirit.
As a leader in logistics technology, our platform allows us to serve any market, any mode, at any time. We're at the forefront of the logistics market.
Our teams will always find a way to adapt to the best possible solution to service our customers.
Our team is here for our customers, literally 24/7 by 365, because we need to be, and we'll get it done anytime, anywhere. We have a very competitive team, and that's what we really enjoy doing.
Our mantra is simple: we are the future of freight.